I got my thing. We're ready.
Yeah, we are. We are on. This is Civil Discourse Now. We're live on Mark Small. We are streaming, broadcasting, coming to you live wherever you are on the planet or on the International Space Station, or if you're a planetary person going through the cosmos, whatever you pick it up. We are live. We're in Indianapolis. My guest this evening.
Or if you're a billionaire buying his way into space for 30 seconds.
No, it's renting his way into space. Okay. There's no buying. You cannot buy space. I think that Stephen Hawking said you can't buy space and time is not money. I'm sorry. I'm cynical. It's been a long day. My guest is Andrew Maternowski, classmate, friend of mine, colleague from law school. Andrew, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well. How about you, Mark?
Well, I'm just hanging in there. I'm doing my best. What can I say? We're going to discuss privatization of prisons, which you're not going to get exactly kind of a fair and balanced thing. You're going to get an accurate thing, people talking about the facts here, such as we know them, because I deal with people who are incarcerated a lot. Andrew, you've dealt with a lot of people who are incarcerated. Our practices both touch on that. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say they touch on it. I'd say they are it.
Got it.
I got about 99% of my cases for the, 30, are we in our 33rd year now?
Yep.
Okay. 99% have been criminal cases.
Alleged criminal.
Yes.
Okay.
85% were no longer alleged, depending on the result, but.
Well, but a lot of mine are civil. I mean, I do, although it's an odd thing to say you're an adversarial proceeding in civil court. It sounds kind of like, well, we're all going to just kind of bow to each other before we go into court and be polite and say, what is it that you want to do to try to take everything that my client owns away from her, or what, whatever.
Or but, how much will it take to make the fact that we took everything away better?
Well, see, that's a middle ground.
Yes.
That aside, I realized 2 years ago I went into Rockville Correctional Facility to meet with a client. That was the only one I hadn't been in the state of Indiana. And I think right now, are there only 2 correctional facilities in the state that are privatized?
Well, Newcastle still is. And are you counting Marion County Jail 2?
No, I'm talking about DOC.
DOC.
I think that Heartland or something, what Plainfield Correctional Facility used to be, not RDC. And for people who are listening to this, RDC is where they assign people to facilities in the Indiana Department of Correction. It's singular, correction. And they determine where they're going to go from there. But Plainfield has a juvenile facility and also a regular correctional facility there. And the correctional facility was purchased by GEO.
Okay, I don't think I was aware of that. I was just aware of the one in Newcastle and the Marion County Jail.
Do you notice any differences between the facilities, between regular DOC and going into a GEO? And if you want to talk about your experiences with Marion County Jail too, go for it. But I've had very little contact there.
The first thing I noticed about Marion County Jail 2, the very first time I went in there, and I guess for your listeners, we should mention what Jail 2 is.
Go ahead.
The county jail is Jail 1 now. That's the jail that the county owns and runs and operates, and it's under the sheriff's control. Jail 2 is the privately run facility. They basically converted a bunch of old warehouses or old rundown buildings downtown.
No, it was one big warehouse. It was a warehouse for construction equipment, and they called, and I forget what the exact name was, but the nickname was, and they painted it on the side of the building. It said "House of a Million Screws," because the little joke. Because I had to pick up equipment there when I was working at college for my old man's company. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's right. Basically, like a lot of downtowns throughout the state, there's a bunch of old vacant buildings that are not being put to any use. So they buy a building on the cheap, convert it to a jail detention holding facility, get a contract with the county, and rent that space out, get paid by the inmate. So it's a private facility. They have a contract with the government, with the sheriff and the county to run that jail as overflow. Now that also puts them in a position where they could possibly do overflow for other counties who need holding, or for the federal government marshals who sometimes need holding. I believe the marshals have taken all of their local inmates and they've been holding them down in Kentucky because the cooperation and the facilities in the local county jails where they were renting out space were not satisfactory, and the feds generally took a harsher view towards inhumane conditions. But the first thing I noticed the first time I walked into jail 2, you go in through the 2 security doors and you're in the receiving area before you go through the metal detector. And what do you think? There's a little sign right there stating their stock price for the day. That tells you all you need to know. We could probably end this podcast today by saying that's the problem with private prisons, is it's strictly a money deal.
So they're giving all these people that they're holding in detention a chance at their stock, is what you're saying.
Well, they are their stock.
Well, and you look at the operation of a facility like that, and it's like, where are they going to make their profit? And they either make it off of shorting what they provide to inmates, and there are serious questions about medical care, because I know there was one lawsuit on Marion County that involved them not having a physician on for all 3 shifts down there at one point.
Right.
And that means, in case people are listening, people die. And so if you're going to say, well, we should be strict on people that are convicted of crimes, realize we have one fourth of the world's prison population in this country. The United States does, and we only have 5% of the world's population. So it's disproportionate, and you're going to be wanting to be tough on crime, folks, until it's you or your loved one. And so people shouldn't be held in inhumane conditions and have to worry about dying from healthcare things. So they either short on essentials, or there's been a problem nationwide with essentially slave labor. They've been using people on the cheap, and if you watch Shawshank Redemption, it kind of tells you where they can run people in on labor. And that's an exemption or an exception to the 13th Amendment that bans slavery, is that if somebody's held in servitude because of a penal or correctional thing, it's not considered slavery. So that's bad not being in prison. I mean, people die in there, and there's Article 1, Section 19 of the Indiana Constitution, 18, says the penal code shall be founded on the principles of reformation and not vindictive justice. And so we should be trying to help people out so that they learn skills and aren't brutalized.
Well, that's the foundation of it. The problem is when you have a private company, as you said, they're going to short something, whether it's food, whether it's conditions, supervision, medical care, treatment of other kinds. They're not going to do that. If you're in a private facility and your doctor on the outside would give you this super antibiotic to address whatever issue you've got going on, the private facility is going to give you an aspirin. And that's after a month when they finally get somebody competent to check you out.
And the things are even, I mean, when it comes to not giving people services there, you'd think that I had a client who had a double life sentence who was not the person who pulled the trigger or used the knife or anything. And he had hepatitis, and he died in 2010, I think it was. They wouldn't put him on a transplant list for a liver because he was a double lifer in a prison.
Right.
And I don't think that we should determine life. I mean, that was a death sentence, and we shouldn't determine life and death on how we're putting people in. Now, going to the whole thing about people, and kind of shifting gears a little bit, but it's like when the numbers started really going up on prisons, coincided a lot with the war on drugs. And we were discussing, I think before we went on the air, the war on drugs is over. And I was there at a couple of different celebrations. They were called Grateful Dead concerts. It was, but it was absurd, especially when you consider now that marijuana is legal in so many states, and psilocybin is legal in some states, and it doesn't do any good to make things illegal and punish people when you create an illicit market for it, and people are going to make money hand over fist from prohibition. I mean, the same dynamics apply to drugs as did to the drug of alcohol, and not many people realize it's a drug. It's a drug.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple comparison that so many people since the early 70s, maybe late 60s, couldn't follow. My email tag used to be "The war on drugs is over, drugs won," and that's been debatable. But if I change it to "The war on drugs is over, marijuana won," in at least 3/4 of the states, I think it's accurate at this point. But yeah, the movie with not Robert Redford, Kevin Costner, "Build It and They Will Come."
Field of Dreams, Andy. Well, hey, you're not a baseball fan? Oh my God, I would have invited you on here if I had.
You know I'm a lifelong Cubs fan, so.
Yeah, and the Ricketts aside.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to more pleasant things than the Cubs operation right now.
We won in 2016. Hey.
Yeah, I can die now. The prison building has increased along with the war on drugs, because if a judge is sitting there and he or she has a close call on somebody, do I give this person a chance to go into a outside treatment program, be on probation, and show that they can be law-abiding citizens, or do I send them to prison? Well, if you have all the prison beds available in the world and there's not an overcrowding problem, you know where that judge is going to send that person. And that kind of feeds it, because the more judges send people to prison, the more prisons are going to be built. And that's when you cross over into needing the private facilities.
And that's also, I mean, when you look at judges and prosecutors don't win elections by saying, I'm going to make sure that the rights of the accused are protected, right, and we don't send innocent people to prison. But also, when you're talking about, well, if you stay out of trouble for 2 years for a victimless crime, it's like, don't smoke pot for 2 years after being, where you pleaded guilty to felony possession, because it's the second one within 5 years, and you're within 300 feet of an elementary school and 600 feet of a convenience store or something. Absurd crap. So stay out of trouble, and you'll be. And why? Well, what the hell does that do?
Yeah, in theory, the Department of Correction is supposed to rehabilitate people per our Constitution. In theory, there are a number of programs within the DOC in Indiana: recovery while incarcerated, purposeful incarceration, a lot of things that are available. The problem is that to the extent those programs exist, they're backlogged. So you have a situation where I've had judges sentence people to a longer sentence
just so they could get in the program.
Just so they can get in the program, because if it's someone with a 2-do-1 or a 2-do, under the new statutes, it's 2-do a year and a half, that's not enough time for them to complete a program. So in essence, the judge lies to the DOC by giving somebody 6 years so they can get into a program, get their time cut, then they bring them back and modify them and put them back to probation if they can get into the program. The problem, particularly now, is with COVID, none of those programs are operating throughout the DOC for the better part of 18 months. So nobody was getting serious time cuts. Nobody was getting treatment, because all those programs required people to mingle and go to different programs and classes and opportunities like that, and they just cut those down cold.
Well, and the thing is about when you're looking at sentencing statutes, they'll get really, really strict and stricter and stricter, because again, politicians don't get reelected in states like Indiana. by saying we want to make sure our system is such that people are given a chance. We rehabilitate them. Instead, the more strict you can be in the statute code, the better. But then they get to a point where everything is overcrowded. Everybody realizes it's an absurd failure. And then they go back to time cuts and less strict sentencing. And it's crazy.
Well, the criminal code reform we had in 2014, comprehensive, I think the first since 1975, 75 or 78 major modifications of the criminal code. Everything from A to Z was changed. The levels of offenses, comprehensive reform, but then the legislature said, okay, except for the very bottom level offenses and misdemeanors, you'll still get 2 for 1 on the prison time, but everybody else is doing 75%, which ended up increasing the DOC population. People are serving longer sentences. And again, that goes back to the privatization, because if you have more people, you need more jails, and then you bring in these private torture houses.
Well, when you talk about the sentencing and the 75, 76 penal code was the last one before we had 2014 or whatever, the ruling of the Indiana Supreme Court on Article 1, Section 18 was that it did not apply to individual cases. I argued a death penalty case in 2002, and the court said, no, it does not. Somebody knocking at the door?
No, go ahead. I'm going to grab something I want to show you.
Oh, okay. So you dressed up. You're wearing slacks and a shirt and tie. Jeez, Andy.
I was in court.
Well, okay. So I was briefing, but they said that Article 1, Section 18 only applies to the penal code as a whole, not individual cases. And so I had a case where I called Professor Kerr from the law school, who had been the recording secretary for the 75-76 Penal Code Study Commission, and he testified in court that because the Supreme Court of Indiana said it's a weighing mechanism for the penal code as a whole and not for individual cases. And he testified, nobody said let's weigh the penal code as a whole. and they still wouldn't say, well, okay, well, you called us on that one. We got to admit.
The problem is all our case law talks about you can't go beneath the language of the statute and the wording because we don't have the legislative history like some states do that they can rely on.
No, we did. This is from the Constitution. When Walter Palmer was the guy that wrote Article 1, Section 18 of the Constitution of Indiana in the 1850-51 Constitutional Convention. I had his quotes. I had all these things he'd said about Reformation, all these things about people saying, well, Walter Palmer didn't say a whole lot at the convention, but when he said it, he meant it about this. I had all this stuff. And it's like, no, never mind. We don't have it.
Here's what I wanted to show you. I'm not sure how this is going to go. This is, all right, that way.
Pocket part.
No, it's the mini criminal code from 1988. That we get from the state. That's got Stephen Goldsmith's number on it. Our name down there is the Marion County prosecutor. That is how wide that is.
Okay.
I don't have the reverse picture thing down quite yet.
Okay.
This is 2015. My 2020 and 21 is outside. That's how advanced we've come. That's 4 times as big.
So
and this is the criminal code.
You're not showing the print. I mean, you're older now, Andy. Could be the print's larger.
No, the print is no larger than it ever was on these puny things.
Well, we simplify by making it more complex.
Well, one of the examples of the criminal code gone amok was the theft statute and the 30 versions of theft that we had and the 25 different definitions of what it meant to permanently deprive somebody of the use of their property.
and exercise dominion and all that.
Yes. And I mean, you had, cable theft, utility theft. Every entity that had any lobby juice down at the State House got their own theft subsection. And it got to a point where it was ridiculous. I mean, we got a thing where the catalytic converter and the precious metals people are getting all involved in the mix and getting auto theft, where you steal a catalytic converter, to count as the entire vehicle and jumping up to a level 5 felony if you have a prior.
Okay, is that a case where Clint was convicted of attempted destruction of an item used in interstate commerce so they could get him on a federal charge? It was a car. And it was in Indiana, but it had been manufactured in Ohio. And it's like,
close enough.
Actually, the Supreme Court ruled that statute was unconstitutionally vague. So,
well, think back to the old theft statute. If you went in and you stole a Jolly Rancher and didn't pay the nickel for that, and if you had a prior theft, or even if you didn't have a prior theft, a theft of anything of any value,
Class D felony.
D felony, 6 months to, well, it used to be 6 months to 3 years, and 6 months to 2.5.
No, but you're talking about level 6 felony, 6 months to 2.5 now.
Right, but the old Class D felonies.
Yeah, I know the letters went away. Why the hell did they do that?
That messed me up. Messed me up bad. Then you have to remember it's 3/4 instead of half.
I know, and then you're trying to figure out, okay, and I'm going back to Jethro Bodine going, ought, carry the ought, and it's just, and then when you're talking about classifications in a different sense, because you're talking about classifications, let's say in DOC, when somebody goes to RDC in Plainfield and they look at the length of the sentence the person has, I don't know what diagnostic tests they give them these days, because once they're in DOC does not like to give access to lawyers, because that means fewer lawsuits they have to face. But it's like, if you're a certain level in security, they assign you to a facility. And I've noticed in the last couple of years, most sex offenders are going to Newcastle.
Right. I believe GEO, is it still called GEO, or have they named their corporation?
I know CCA renamed theirs to like Core Right or something.
Yeah, Core Civic. Civic.
Yeah,
I think they have a separate contract for sex offenders out there. Almost all sex offenders go to Newcastle these days. And
they got a dog place on that side of town, which is like, I like hot dogs when I go to small towns in Indiana, but I thought that was odd that they switched the classification such that sex offenders went there.
I think the theory might have been that sex offenders are so low on the totem pole in the DOC and subject to abuse from other inmates that maybe if they're all together, there's fewer of those incidents involved, maybe.
Or they could say they're so low on the totem pole, let's just send them to Newcastle. I'm sorry.
Send them to the shittiest place around.
Anything negative about Newcastle, but it's that when you're dealing with different levels of security on individuals, you're dealing with very real things about one, who's being incarcerated, two, what their prospects are for rehabilitation and release. If somebody's being given a 120-year sentence, what do they have to do to try and get out? Yeah. And they x-ray cakes going into the facilities now. Actually, not anymore. Everybody gave up on the cakes. But it's like, why try to rehabilitate yourself if you're going to be in there for the rest of your life? And then if you're looking at lower levels of security, then you have to realize that when people are reduced a level because they've served so much time, then not only can they go into a different level of a facility, let's say a multiple level facility like Wabash Valley, or within a community like Pendleton has a couple of, it has CIF and the main Pendleton facility.
Mark, you're old enough that you should still be calling that the reformatory, damn it.
Hey, there's only one reformatory, okay?
And there's only one prison, and there's only one farm, but nobody calls them that anymore.
Hey, the farm was out next to Greencastle, where I went to undergrad, and I went to Michigan City for a case a couple of years ago. I was going through I was waiting to go in, and I said to the correctional officer there, did they film any part of the Untouchables here? And he goes, not anything. He goes, but you are going through something that is a relic of Dillinger's breaking people out there. I said, what? And he goes, this is like the first metal detector in a prison in the United States. And it's like, ooh, that's kind of cool. And then I went over to Pendleton and the reformatory. So I was over there and I said, so, because Dillinger was there. I mean, that was where he was incarcerated.
Yeah.
I said, so is there anything in Dillinger's here anymore? And whoever it was said, no, that file was picked clean long ago. Somebody was going, hey, I got this from Dillinger's, you know? And it's like, well, I guess that's a Hoosier success story or something. And I never, well, actually, I asked him about Manson out at the boys' school. And there were a couple of people who had said, well, there were stories about him when he was here, because he did a couple of stretches at Plainfield at the boys' school. But, you know,
auto theft, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, so you put somebody like Manson in as a young child into the correctional facility. He didn't want to leave. When he was turned out at the federal correctional facility in San Diego, I think in '67, he begged the officers there not to let him go because he didn't want to leave prison. That's where he'd been nearly his entire life.
Yeah, well, nobody likes to leave home.
Yeah. And that's when you're looking at people who are so institutionalized that once they leave the facility, they don't know how to pattern their behavior in any other way than to just to survive. And,
and that's a fundamental argument for prison reform. Short of the people who are getting executed or doing life, everybody we send as a society into prison is coming back out. Shouldn't we be doing everything we can to have them come out not being worse than when they went in? Because when they come out and they're off parole or they're off probation, yeah, what do you think the recidivism rate is?
38%.
Yeah. So they're going to come out and they're going to know how to be better criminals because all we've done is warehouse them with other more serious criminals.
And also we're blocking them from getting jobs because people won't hire felons.
Oh, yeah.
And they can't live because the minute you put something in that's restrictive on somebody's liberty because of a certain type of offense, people are going to start adding to, I'm tough on crime. I'm the person who got the statute in so that nobody can live within so many miles of you. So you've got all these offenses that classify people so they can't live within 1,500 feet, I think is a popular distance for Indiana on things. And so you're setting up, they can't get jobs, they can't have a place to live. The only things that they've learned for a while are things that they learned to survive, and then you're wondering why they reoffend.
Well, remember when we used to have the possession of marijuana statute included a mandatory 6-month driver's license suspension?
That had nothing to do with driving.
Driver's license suspension, simple possession of marijuana, not involving a car. You're sitting on your porch smoking a joint.
I wouldn't. I wasn't sitting on my joint.
Right. In theory, if that's what you're doing, you're walking down the street, you've got a baggie in your pocket. You lose your driver's license. Was it 6 months or a year?
6 months.
Minimum 6 months, up to 2 years. That's right. Your license is suspended. At the time when there was no hardship license option, your ability to register and title a motor vehicle also canceled. So you're married, the vehicle you have titled and plated in you and your wife's name, canceled. You can't drive at all for 6 months to a year. So
wait, there's more.
Well, they didn't forfeit the car though. So nothing to do with the vehicle, and you can't drive for 6 months. The plate has to be redone. The title has to be redone. So when you can't drive and you live somewhere other than Indianapolis, South Bend, Gary, Evansville, Fort Wayne, how do you get across town where there's no bus system to get to your job, to pay your child support, to support yourself, to comply with all your conditions of probation? If you're an alcoholic, how do you get to your AA meetings? How do you get to your treatment? Too bad. Figure that out.
Yeah, and the people that are caught in that system are predominantly poor, and
poor and getting poorer.
Yes. And now the one, and I think we should wrap this up. This has been fun, Andy. One thing I think we should address is a major area of crime in Indianapolis, and it's just during a specific time between Washington Street and Ohio on the south and the north, and Capitol and Senate, east and west. Right there between January and March of any given year, because there are people that gather on the second floor of a building there. And I think there's more panhandling that goes on in the state capitol than any place in the state of Indiana for that period of time. And they're the ones that are a source of a lot of the libertarians talk about how we should have fewer laws, and then they're the ones that really want to go out and beat people up.
Well, as you said, there are no judges or prosecutors who ever lost an election or won an election by being soft on crime.
No, I didn't say that. I said they never won an election by not saying stuff. They never won an election by saying, I'll defend people's rights. I didn't say soft on crime.
Okay. Corrected. No politicians have ever lost an election by not hammering people and not being the one to add for a higher, you get a crime bill, 75 people are co-signing on it because they don't want to be left behind and be the one who didn't vote to increase sentences on ex-offenders because some guy down in Jasper had something happen and he knew his legislator, and that legislator got, hogtied into jacking up the crime for stealing a tractor if it's used on a farm of so many acres. We have so many statutes that are like that. And we're supposed to have general purpose statutes, not things that only apply to one tiny little area.
Well, and the one on that I think a perfect example of a statute that is a general purpose statute was the exemption for sales of alcohol on Sundays. It could be allowed. At one point, the only place in the state of Indiana it was allowed was for sporting events at racing courses where it was taking place at an enclosed oval of 2 miles in length.
How many places do we have like that? Well, and go back to our original gambling. They call it a boat because technically the boat had to undock for so many minutes a day. So down in Lawrenceburg on the river, the boat would move 5 feet offshore, hang out in the river for a little bit, and then come back in. That qualified it as a boat.
Well, and that was like 88. I think they legalized gambling, and a lot of the rural communities negotiated. They objected to it on religious grounds until they said, well, we won't have it in Indianapolis. We'll move the stuff out to your place. And then all of a sudden it was okay.
Yeah.
Then they had to do it on a boat.
Lawrenceburg is a perfect example. Lawrenceburg's downtown used to be vacant, and now it's a sharp little place because there's all that gambling money there.
Well, and see, sin makes money. Andy, any last words on privatized prisons? Because we kind of started talking about crime and society in general.
It all goes together because as long as you have ridiculous crime bills and statutes and sentences, you're going to end up having private prisons picking up the slack that the state can't cover. So they all do work together, but the primary problem with the private prisons is a profit incentive where they're cutting dimes, and the only way you cut costs is by depriving your inmates who you're supposed to be rehabilitating. It's X times Y equals Z. You get this much for an inmate, $35 a day for an inmate times this many inmates. That's a set number. And if you can cut off of what that rate is by pinching pennies everywhere you can, whether it's, adding more potatoes to the diet, cheap food, starches, instead of quality nutrition, you're going to make more money. And when that's what you're in the business to do, that's what you have to do.
Don't knock having potatoes in the diet, because when I moved from my parents' farm, my mother was a terrible cook, to college, I couldn't understand why I was a kid. I had all these really bad stomach cramps. And then I'm eating potatoes and stuff in the dorm. I thought it was wonderful my freshman year. So, Andy, thanks for coming on this evening.
Mark, see you.
This is Civil Discourse Now. My guest this evening has been Andy Maternowski, Indianapolis attorney. And Andy, what areas do you focus on?
I do almost exclusively criminal defense. I travel all over the state. I practice out of Indianapolis, but I have more cases in outlying counties than Indianapolis. I do, getting a bad feedback here, I do a significant amount of drug work all over the state, but also handle everything from misdemeanors to murders.
Homicides. Done a few myself, never been caught. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in, listening, etc. Andy, thanks very much. Civil Discourse Now, I'm Mark Small. And that was not, I meant okay, A-okay. That was not any, that gesture that I made. It was not, I just realized these gestures are bad to say things about. Anyways, and that's the, anyways, have a nice evening, Andy.
Thanks, Mark. Take care.
Take care. Have a good one.
Bye.